The alien girl ate paper to survive until a human delivery boy decided to leave real food daily. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The streets of New Europa gleamed under the pale glow of artificial suns. A sprawling megacity built on the rust-red plains of Mars, where 50 different species lived, worked, and traded beneath transparent domes that shielded them from the thin atmosphere outside. Among the delivery drones and hovering cargo platforms, 22-year-old Nathan Brooks navigated his beat-up ground transport through the lower commercial district, a human doing grunt work that most species considered beneath them. Nathan had been delivering packages for Apex Logistics for 3 years now, ever since he arrived on Mars with nothing but a duffel bag and a need to disappear from Earth's overcrowded cities. The job was simple, the pay was terrible, and nobody bothered him, which was exactly what he wanted. His route took him through the seamier parts of the colony where the gleaming facades gave way to corrugated metal walls and flickering neon signs advertising services in a dozen different languages and twice as many scripts. It was on a Tuesday, during his usual afternoon run, that Nathan first noticed something odd in the alley behind the Zentari textile warehouse. He had stopped to reorganize his cargo bay, annoyed that the automated sorting system had once again jumbled his packages into complete chaos, when he heard a faint rustling sound coming from behind a row of recycling bins. Mars rats, he thought at first, though the colony supposedly had them under control. But the sound was too deliberate, too careful. Nathan stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel that the maintenance crews spread to absorb moisture. The bins were industrial-sized containers, taller than he was, painted a faded green that had long since surrendered to rust and graffiti. Between two of them, partially hidden by shadows, something moved. "Hello," Nathan called out, immediately feeling stupid for talking to what was probably just an animal or a malfunctioning cleaning drone. The movement stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence and the distant hum of the dome's atmospheric processors. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind the bins. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. It was a girl, humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. Her skin had a faint lavender tint, and her eyes were larger than a human's, colored a deep violet that seemed to catch and hold the dim light. She was thin, painfully so, with angular features that might have been beautiful if not for the hollow desperation in her expression. She looked to be in her mid-teens by human standards, though Nathan knew better than to assume age worked the same way across species. She stared at him with those huge eyes, and Nathan could see her entire body tensing, ready to bolt. In her hands, she clutched something that made his stomach turn. It was a piece of cardboard, torn from one of the recycling bins, and she had been eating it. The evidence was there in the pulp stuck to her fingers, the way her jaw worked to swallow the fibrous mass. "Hey, it's okay," Nathan said, raising his hand slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl took a step backward, pressing herself against the wall. Her clothes were little more than rags, a tattered gray tunic that hung loosely on her skeletal frame. Nathan noticed the slight shimmer in the air around her, the telltale sign of a personal temperature field, which meant she was from a species that required different climate conditions than the standard Mars colony maintained. "Do you speak standard?" Nathan asked, referring to the common trade language that most species used for interstellar commerce. The girl's eyes darted to the alley's entrance, then back to Nathan. She nodded, barely, but enough to be visible. "Are you hungry? Real food, I mean. Not paper." Another nod, this one more emphatic. Her hands tightened on the cardboard, and Nathan realized with a sinking feeling that she was protecting it, that this garbage was precious to her because it was all she had. Nathan's heart broke a little. He had seen poverty before, had lived it himself back on Earth, but there was something particularly cruel about seeing someone reduced to eating trash just to survive. He glanced back at his transport, thinking about the protein bars he kept in the cab for long shifts. They were not much, but they were real food. "Wait here," he said, holding up a hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture for stay put. "I'll be right back." He jogged to his transport, pulled open the driver's side door, and grabbed the small cooler he kept under the seat. Inside were 3 protein bars, an apple he had been saving for later, and a bottle of water. He grabbed everything and hurried back to the alley, half expecting the girl to have vanished. But she was still there, watching him with those enormous violet eyes, her body coiled tight like a spring. Nathan crouched down a few feet away from her, not wanting to seem threatening, and set the food on the ground. "Here," he said, sliding it toward her. "It's not gourmet, but it's actual food. Calories, nutrients, all that good stuff." The girl stared at the offerings like they were precious gems. Her hands trembled as she reached for the protein bar, unwrapping it with agonizing slowness, as if she could not quite believe this was real. When she bit into it, her eyes closed, and a sound escaped her throat that was somewhere between a sob and a sigh of relief. Nathan sat back on his heels and watched her eat. She consumed the first bar in seconds, then paused, looking at him uncertainly. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to the rest. "It's all yours." She ate the second bar more slowly, savoring it, then picked up the apple and examined it with something like wonder. Nathan realized she might not know what it was. "It's fruit," he explained. "From Earth. You eat it like this." He mimed biting into an apple, and after a moment's hesitation, she copied the gesture. The crunch of the apple seemed to surprise her, but she kept eating, her eyes never leaving his face. "What's your name?" Nathan asked when she had finished the apple and was carefully sipping the water, making it last. The girl hesitated, then spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, musical in a way that made Nathan think of wind chimes. "Lyra," she said. "I'm Nathan. What are you doing out here, Lyra? Where's your family?" The light in Lyra's eyes dimmed. She looked down at the empty water bottle in her hands, turning it over and over. "Gone," she said simply. "Ship accident. 6 months ago." Nathan felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry. What about the colony authorities? There are aid programs, shelters." Lyra's laugh was bitter, too old for her apparent age. "For citizens. For documented residents. I was passenger, not immigrant. When family died, I became problem. No papers, no identity, no rights. They tried to deport me, but no world would take me without payment. So I disappeared." The casual cruelty of bureaucracy, Nathan thought. He had dealt with his own share of red tape, but at least as a human citizen, he had options. This girl had nothing. She had fallen through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect people, but mostly just protected itself. "How have you been surviving?" Nathan asked, though the cardboard in her hands answered that question. "I hide. I scavenge. Sometimes I find food in garbage. Mostly I find paper. It fills stomach, even if it provides nothing else. I can digest cellulose, at least partially. My species evolved on world with limited options." Lyra went on to explain, her voice barely above a whisper, that the first month had been the hardest. After escaping the deportation processing, she had wandered the colony's lower levels, terrified and alone. She learned to move through the maintenance tunnels, the forgotten spaces between buildings where the colony's infrastructure ran like veins through a body. She learned which alleys the sanitation crews never checked, which bins might contain something edible before the recyclers claimed them. She learned to recognize the sounds of different species' footsteps, to know when to hide and when it was safe to emerge. Humans walked with a heavy, purposeful stride. Zentari clicked as they moved, their chitinous legs tapping against metal and stone. Krillians made almost no sound at all, which made them the most dangerous, the hardest to avoid. There were others living in the shadows, Lyra told Nathan. Other refugees, other beings who had fallen through society's cracks. An elderly Draken male who had lost his pension when his homeworld's economy collapsed. A pair of Tethian siblings whose parents had abandoned them at a spaceport. A human woman, older than Nathan, who never spoke but sometimes left food where others might find it. They formed a loose community, these invisible people, helping each other when they could, sharing information about which areas were safe and which were patrolled too heavily. But they also competed for resources, for the limited food and shelter available to those without documentation or credits. It was a delicate balance between cooperation and survival. Lyra had tried to work, she explained, had offered her labor to merchants and shop owners in exchange for food. But without documentation, most refused. The few who agreed often cheated her, offering a fraction of what they had promised, knowing she had no legal recourse. One restaurant owner had her clean his kitchen for 6 hours, then threatened to call security when she asked for the meal he had promised. That was when she started eating paper. She had read somewhere, in a book from her father's library back when she had a father and a library and a home, that cellulose was a carbohydrate. Her species could break it down, at least partially, though it provided minimal nutrition. A piece of cardboard might fill her stomach enough to sleep, might quiet the painful cramping that constant hunger brought. It was not living, Lyra said, her violet eyes meeting Nathan's. It was just not dying, which was not the same thing at all. Nathan felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. This was wrong on every level. No one should have to eat trash to survive, especially not a kid. The fact that dozens of sophants walked past this alley every day, that the gleaming towers of New Europa stood just a few blocks away while Lyra starved in the shadows, made him sick. He understood more than Lyra knew. Nathan himself had been homeless once, back on Earth, after his mother died, and he aged out of the foster system with nowhere to go. He had spent 6 months sleeping in shelters, eating at soup kitchens, feeling invisible as thousands of people walked past him every day without seeing him. He knew what it was like to be treated as a problem rather than a person, to have bureaucrats look through you as if you did not exist. That experience had brought him to Mars. He had saved every credit from odd jobs, sold everything he owned, and bought a one-way ticket to the colony with the desperate hope that he could start over somewhere new. The delivery job had been his salvation, giving him just enough income to rent a tiny apartment and build something resembling a life. But he had never forgotten what it felt like to be hungry, to be cold, to wonder if anyone in the world cared whether he lived or died. And now, looking at Lyra with her paper meal and her haunted eyes, he saw himself reflected back. Except she had it worse. At least he had been human, had been a citizen of Earth with theoretical rights even if no one enforced them. Lyra had nothing, not even that. The memory of those dark months fueled Nathan's determination. He had been saved by small acts of kindness, by the shelter worker who bent the rules to let him stay an extra week, by the restaurant owner who let him wash dishes for meals, by the stranger who gave him a winter coat without asking questions. Those small mercies had kept him alive long enough to find his footing, to become someone who could stand on his own. Now it was his turn to be that person for someone else. Not because it made him feel good or because he expected anything in return, but because he knew, bone deep, that this was what people did. When you see someone drowning, you throw them a rope. It was that simple and that complicated. Listen, he said, his mind already working through the logistics. I come through this route every day around this time. I can bring you food. Real food. Would that help? Lyra's eyes widened. Why would you do that? Nathan shrugged, feeling suddenly uncomfortable with the directness of the question. Because you need help, and I can help. It's not complicated. But you are human. Humans are not known for charity, especially not to other species. The traders say humans are only interested in profit. Nathan could not help but laugh at that. Yeah, well, the traders are working with a limited sample size. Not all humans are merchants and mercenaries. Some of us are just trying to get by, same as everyone else. And some of us remember what it's like to be hungry. Lyra studied him for a long moment, and Nathan had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing right through him, reading the truth in his face. Finally, she nodded. I would be grateful. Very grateful. Don't mention it, Nathan said, standing up and brushing the dust from his pants. I mean that literally. Don't mention this to anyone. If the authorities find out you're here, they'll sweep you up and you'll be back where you started. I understand. I am good at being invisible. Nathan glanced at his chronometer and cursed under his breath. He was already 15 minutes behind schedule, and his supervisor was a Krillian with zero tolerance for delays. I have to go, but I'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place. Okay. Lyra nodded, clutching the empty protein bar wrappers like they were treasure. Thank you, Nathan Brooks. I will not forget this kindness. As Nathan drove away, he caught sight of Lyra in his rearview monitor, watching him from the shadows of the alley. He felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose he had not experienced in years. He had come to Mars to disappear, to be nobody and do nothing of consequence. But maybe, just maybe, he could do something that mattered. Even if it was just feeding one hungry kid, it was more than he had been doing before. The next day, Nathan stopped at a food market before his shift started. He bought a selection of items that would keep without refrigeration: dried fruits, nuts, more protein bars, some Zentari grain cakes that the vendor swore were nutritious and filling. He spent nearly half his daily wage on food for Lyra, money he probably should have saved for his own rent, but he found he did not care. When he arrived at the alley, Lyra was already there, emerging from her hiding spot with the wariness of a stray cat approaching food. But when she saw the bag Nathan carried, her face lit up with an expression of pure joy that made every credit he had spent feel worthwhile. "You came back," she said, and there was wonder in her voice, as if the concept of someone keeping their word was foreign to her. "Told you I would," Nathan said, handing her the bag. "I got you a variety of stuff. Wasn't sure what your species could eat, so I played it safe with basics." Lyra opened the bag and peered inside, her eyes going wide. "This is too much. This must have cost many credits." "Don't worry about it. Just eat, okay? You need to put some weight on." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Nathan would swing by the alley every afternoon with food for Lyra. At first, she simply took the offerings with quiet gratitude and disappeared back into the shadows. But gradually, as she began to trust him, she started to talk. Nathan learned that Lyra was from a species called the Varine, a peaceful people from a world near the galactic core. She had been traveling with her family, her parents, and younger brother, when their transport ship suffered a catastrophic malfunction in the Mars orbital space. The story came out in fragments, pieces of memory that Lyra shared during those afternoon meetings. Her father had been a teacher, she told Nathan one day while eating a handful of dried berries. He taught literature and philosophy at one of the great academies on their homeworld. Her mother was an artist who worked with light itself, creating sculptures that existed only as patterns of photons suspended in carefully controlled fields. Her brother, Talon, had been only 8 years old, obsessed with collecting rocks from every world they visited. They had been traveling to a conference on Proxima Station, Lyra explained, where her father was scheduled to present a paper on comparative ethics across species. It was supposed to be a grand adventure, a chance for the family to see new worlds together. Lyra had been excited, filling a journal with sketches and observations about each place they stopped. The accident had killed most of the passengers instantly. Lyra survived only because she had been in a cargo bay retrieving something for her mother when the hull breach occurred. She had been looking for a specific shade of blue pigment that her mother wanted to use in a new piece, searching through their luggage in the dim cargo hold while the rest of her family remained in their passenger cabin. The trauma of that day haunted her. Nathan could see it in the way her eyes would sometimes go distant, focused on something terrible that only she could see. She described the sound first, a grinding shriek of metal that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then the alarms, and the horrible feeling of the ship lurching sideways as its gravity systems failed. She had grabbed onto a cargo net, holding on for her life as everything not secured began to float and tumble in the sudden zero gravity. The emergency bulkheads had sealed automatically, trapping Lyra in the cargo bay, but also saving her life. She had pounded on the door, screaming for her family, but there was no response. It took rescue crews nearly 6 hours to reach the survivors. 6 hours that Lyra spent alone in the dark, not knowing if anyone she loved was still alive. By the time they cut through to her section, it was over. Her family was gone, lost to the void along with 73 other passengers. Lyra had been one of only 12 survivors, and the only Varine among them. But as the weeks passed and Lyra's physical condition improved, Nathan also saw her personality begin to emerge. She was smart, frighteningly so, with a quick wit and an insatiable curiosity about everything. She asked Nathan endless questions about Earth, about human culture, about his life. In turn, Nathan learned about Varine customs, their poetry-based language, their complex social structures that humans would probably find baffling. Nathan also learned that he had vastly underestimated the problem of keeping someone alive in hiding. Food was just the beginning. Lyra needed clean water, which she had been obtaining from a leaking pipe, but which was probably contaminated. She needed better shelter than the cardboard fort she had constructed behind the bins. She needed medical care, clothes, basic hygiene supplies, everything that people took for granted when they had access to civilization. Nathan found himself becoming increasingly invested in solving these problems. He bought a cheap filtration bottle for water. He brought blankets and a waterproof tarp to improve her shelter. He stole a medikit from his company's first aid supplies, figuring they could spare it. When he noticed Lyra shivering despite her temperature field, he requisitioned a portable heater meant for warming cargo and smuggled it to her. His co-workers started to notice his odd behavior. Why was Nathan always in a hurry to finish his route? Why was he spending so much on supplies when everyone knew he barely made enough to cover rent? Nathan deflected their questions with vague answers about a hobby project, but he knew the scrutiny was dangerous. The last thing he needed was someone getting curious enough to follow him. It was on a chilly evening in what passed for autumn on Mars that everything changed. Nathan arrived at the alley to find Lyra in distress, her normally lavender skin flushed dark purple, her breathing rapid and shallow. She was curled up in her shelter, shaking despite the heater running at full power. Lyra. Nathan dropped to his knees beside her, his heart hammering. What's wrong? What happened? Sick, she managed, her voice weak. Yesterday, ate something from bins. Should not have. Was so hungry, could not wait for you. Nathan cursed himself. He should have been bringing more food. Should have made sure she never felt desperate enough to scavenge. Okay, it's okay. We're going to fix this. I'm taking you to a hospital. No. Lyra grabbed his arm with surprising strength. No hospitals. They will scan me, find I have no documentation, deport me. Please, Nathan. Then you could die, Nathan said bluntly. Is that better? Lyra's eyes filled with tears. At least I die free. At least I die with dignity, not in deportation center eating paper while bureaucrats decide my fate. Nathan sat back, his mind racing. She had a point, as horrible as it was. The colony's medical system would flag her immediately as undocumented, and from there, it would be a quick trip to detention. But he could not just let her suffer. There had to be another way. An idea struck him, reckless and probably illegal, but it was better than the alternatives. My apartment, he said. It's small, but it has a bathroom, a real bed, climate control. I can take care of you there. Lyra stared at him. You would do that? Risk harboring undocumented alien? Apparently, yeah. Come on. We need to move before someone sees us. Getting Lyra to his transport without being noticed required more stealth than Nathan had ever exercised in his life. He wrapped her in a blanket, making her look like a bundle of cargo, and carried her to his vehicle. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than many of the packages he delivered daily. The drive to his apartment complex in the human residential district was the longest 20 minutes of Nathan's life. Every security checkpoint a potential disaster. But luck was with them. The guards were bored and waved him through without a second glance. Nathan's apartment was on the third floor of a building that had seen better days, a cramped one-room unit with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, and a window that looked out on another building's wall. To Nathan, it was barely adequate. To Lyra, stumbling through the door with his support, it must have seemed like paradise. He settled her on his bed, the only real piece of furniture he owned besides a rickety table and chair. Lyra's eyes roamed the space, taking in the few personal possessions Nathan had accumulated. Some clothes hung on a rack, a portable media player, a printed photograph of Earth's Pacific Ocean that he had stuck to the wall. Rest, Nathan said, adjusting the room's temperature controls to something warmer. I'm going to make you some soup. Something gentle on your stomach. Over the next 3 days, Nathan called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years, ignoring his supervisor's angry messages. He focused entirely on nursing Lyra back to health, feeding her small amounts of bland food, making sure she stayed hydrated, monitoring her temperature. He researched marine physiology through the colony's public databases, learning what he could about their medical needs. Slowly, Lyra recovered. Her color returned to normal, her breathing eased, and the frightening weakness left her limbs. By the 4th day, she was sitting up in bed, looking around the apartment with open curiosity. You live here alone? She asked, her voice still a bit raspy. Yeah, it's not much, but it's mine. It is wonderful, Lyra said with complete sincerity. You have walls that keep out cold and rain. You have water that comes from pipes, clean and pure. You have light at the touch of a button. These things are treasures. Nathan felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so long thinking of this place as a dump, a temporary stop on a journey to nowhere, that he had forgotten how fortunate he was to have even this much. Lyra's perspective, forged in the crucible of loss and survival, reminded him that comfort was relative, that safety was a privilege not everyone enjoyed. "You can stay," he said suddenly, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "I mean, if you want. It'll be tight, and we'll have to be careful, but you can stay here. No more sleeping in alleys. No more eating paper." Lyra's eyes shimmered with tears. "Nathan, you have already given me so much. I cannot ask you to risk your home, your safety, for me. You're not asking. I'm offering. And before you argue, think about it practically. You'll be safer here, healthier. And I could use the company, honestly. This place is depressing when it's just me." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, and Nathan could see her weighing the offer, examining it from every angle for hidden traps or obligations. Finally, she smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "Then I accept, with gratitude and humility. I will try to be least troublesome roommate possible." Nathan laughed. "Trust me, the bar is pretty low. I once had a roommate who ate my food, never cleaned, and left his dirty socks everywhere. You've already exceeded those standards just by saying thank you." Living with Lyra turned out to be surprisingly easy. She was quiet and considerate, taking up minimal space and resources. She insisted on contributing however she could, which meant Nathan would come home from work to find his apartment cleaned, his clothes folded, and various small repairs completed with a resourcefulness that amazed him. Lyra had learned to make do with very little, and she brought that ingenuity to every aspect of their shared life. But as the weeks turned into months, Nathan became increasingly aware of the limitations of their situation. Lyra was still undocumented, still at risk every moment she remained on Mars. She could not leave the apartment during the day when neighbors might see her. She had no legal recourse if something went wrong, no access to proper medical care or education, or any of the things beings her age should have. Nathan found himself growing angry at the system, at the casual cruelty of laws that prioritized paperwork over people. He started researching, digging through legal databases and immigration records, looking for some loophole that might help Lyra. The more he learned, the more frustrated he became. The Mars colony's immigration policies were a labyrinth of regulations designed more to exclude than to include. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that Nathan stumbled across something interesting. There was a provision in the colony charter, dating back to the early days of settlement, that allowed residents to sponsor refugees for citizenship under certain conditions. The provision was rarely used because it required the sponsor to assume full legal and financial responsibility for the refugee for a minimum of 5 years. It was a serious commitment, one that could ruin the sponsor if the refugee turned out to be problematic. But Nathan thought it might be exactly what they needed. If he could sponsor Lyra, she would have legal status, access to colony services, the right to work and live openly. The catch was that he would need to prove he had stable employment and adequate resources, neither of which was particularly strong in his case. His delivery job paid poorly, and his savings account was a joke. Nathan spent the next week putting together a sponsorship application, carefully documenting everything, trying to make his meager circumstances look as stable as possible. He wrote a statement explaining Lyra's situation, her family's death, her months of survival on the streets, deliberately emphasizing the humanitarian aspects while downplaying his own involvement in harboring her illegally. When he finally submitted the application, he told himself not to get his hopes up. The bureaucracy ground slowly, and the odds of approval were not great. But at least he was trying, doing something more than just maintaining the status quo. 2 months later, Nathan received a message from the colony's Immigration and Refugee Services. His application had been reviewed and flagged for an in-person interview. Nathan's heart sank when he read that. In-person interviews usually meant they had questions, and questions meant scrutiny, and scrutiny was dangerous. He told Lyra about the interview that evening, and she immediately went pale. "This is bad," she said. "They will ask how you know me, how long I have been here. If they discover I have been living here undocumented, you will be punished. Fines, maybe jail time. I cannot let you risk that for me." "We'll be careful," Nathan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We stick to the story. You've only been here a few weeks. I found you recently and immediately applied for sponsorship. They can't prove otherwise. The interview was scheduled for the following week at the main administrative complex in the heart of New Europa. Nathan took the day off work, claiming a family emergency. He met Lyra outside the building, her first time in public in months. She wore one of Nathan's jackets over her tattered tunic, and he had bought her a scarf to cover her distinctive Varine features as much as possible. Inside, they were directed to a small office where a Zentari bureaucrat named Kelvin waited. Kelvin had the typical Zentari appearance, tall and insectoid, with multifaceted eyes and clicking mandibles. His expression was unreadable, which Nathan supposed was the point. Bureaucrats probably took classes in maintaining neutral faces. Nathan Brooks, Kelvin said. His voice filtered through a translation device that gave it an odd metallic quality. And this must be Lyra. Please sit. They sat in the uncomfortable chairs across from Kelvin's desk. The office was sterile and impersonal, decorated only with a few official seals and a dying plant that someone had optimistically placed by the window. I have reviewed your sponsorship application. Kelvin continued, tapping at a datapad with one of his forearms. It raises several questions. First, how did you come to know Lyra? Nathan had rehearsed this. I found her 3 weeks ago in an alley on my delivery route. She was in bad shape, starving. I gave her food and learned about her situation. Once I realized she had no documentation, I immediately began researching how to help her legally, which led me to the refugee sponsorship program. Kelvin's mandibles clicked in what might have been skepticism. And in these 3 weeks, you felt confident enough in this relationship to commit to a 5-year sponsorship? I felt confident that letting a kid starve to death was wrong, Nathan said, allowing some of his genuine anger to show. The time frame is irrelevant. She needed help. I could provide it. That's all that matters. Altruism, Kelvin said, making it sound like a disease. How refreshing. And yet, unusual, especially from a human. No offense intended. Some taken, Nathan said flatly. Humans are capable of compassion, believe it or not. Kelvin turned his attention to Lyra, who had been sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. And you, Lyra, you have been on Mars for approximately 6 months since the transport accident, correct? Lyra nodded. Yes, sir. Where have you been living during this time? Nathan's heart hammered. This was the critical moment. If Lyra admitted to living on the streets for months, they would want to know why Nathan had only just now applied for sponsorship. I was in detention facilities, Lyra said, the lie smooth and practiced. After the accident, I was placed in temporary housing while authorities tried to contact my homeworld. But my homeworld would not accept me without family and payment for passage. I was about to be deported to a processing station when I escaped. That was 3 weeks ago. Nathan found me shortly after. Nathan forced himself not to react, not to show the surprise he felt at how easily Lyra spun the false narrative. She had clearly given this some thought. Kelvin's mandibles clicked rapidly, his equivalent of a frown. There is no record of a Varine refugee in our detention system. Perhaps records were not properly filed, Lyra suggested. Or perhaps I was registered under my family's name rather than individually. We were all processed together initially. Kelvin tapped at his datapad, clearly searching for something. Nathan held his breath, waiting for the bureaucrat to find some discrepancy that would unravel their story. But after a long moment, Kelvin simply sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from an insectoid alien. The problem, Kelvin said, is that your financial situation is marginal at best, Nathan Brooks. You work a low-wage job with minimal benefits. Your savings are nearly non-existent. How do you propose to support yourself and a dependent for 5 years? I'll work more hours, Nathan said. Pick up extra shifts. Find a second job if necessary. I'm not asking for charity or assistance. I just need the legal framework to keep her safe. Kelvin studied them both for a long moment. Nathan could not read the alien's expression, but he sensed something shifting in the atmosphere of the room, some decision being made behind those multifaceted eyes. You understand, Kelvin said slowly, that if I approve this sponsorship and Lyra commits any crime, violates any regulation, or becomes a burden on colony resources, you will be held legally responsible? This is not a trivial commitment. I understand, Nathan said firmly. Another long pause. Then Kelvin tapped his datapad with a finality that suggested a decision reached. Very well. I am approving your application on a provisional basis. Lyra will be granted temporary residency for 1 year, during which time we will monitor the situation. If, after 1 year, the arrangement appears stable and beneficial to both parties, we will convert the temporary status to permanent residency with a pathway to full citizenship. Nathan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You're approving it? Do not make me regret this decision, Nathan Brooks. I am approving it because, despite the unusual circumstances and the gaps in your story that we both know exist, I believe your intentions are genuine. And because letting a child starve, as you so eloquently put it, is wrong. Sometimes the law should bend in favor of compassion, even if bureaucrats are not supposed to admit such things. Kelvin handed Nathan a datapad. Sign here to formalize the agreement. Lyra will need to report to medical services for a health screening and to receive her temporary identification. She will also be required to attend integration classes to learn about Mars colony regulations and customs. Nathan signed the document, his hand shaking slightly. He could not quite believe this was happening. He had prepared himself for rejection, for complications, for anything except approval. As they left the administrative building, Lyra was silent, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. It was not until they were several blocks away, safely anonymous in the crowds of the commercial district, that she finally spoke. I am legal, she whispered. I am person again. I have rights. I can walk in daylight. Yeah, Nathan said, his own voice rough with emotion. Yeah, you can. Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him. Her violet eyes were streaming now, tears running down her lavender cheeks. You did this. You gave me back my life. How can I ever repay such debt? Nathan felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the weight of what she was implying. You don't owe me anything, Lyra. I just did what anyone decent would do. No, Lyra said firmly. Most beings would have walked past me in that alley. Most beings would have seen problem, not person. You saw me when I was invisible. You fed me when I was starving. You sheltered me when I had nowhere to go. You risked everything for someone you barely knew, someone not even of your species. This is not what anyone would do. This is what only special beings do. Nathan looked away, blinking hard. He had never thought of himself as special. He was just a delivery driver, a nobody who had stumbled into a situation and done his best to muddle through. But maybe that was the point. Maybe heroism was not about being special. It was about being present, about seeing suffering and choosing to act even when it was inconvenient or risky. Come on, he said, clearing his throat. Let's get you that health screening. And after that, I think we should celebrate. There's a Zentari restaurant a few blocks from here that makes these grain cakes that are supposed to be amazing. Real food, not survival rations or protein bars. Lyra smiled through her tears. That sounds perfect. The following months brought changes that Nathan could never have anticipated. With legal status, Lyra was able to enroll in the colony's public education system. Despite having missed years of formal schooling, she quickly proved herself to be a brilliant student, particularly in mathematics and linguistics. Her teachers were amazed by her ability to learn, her hunger for knowledge that matched her earlier hunger for food. Nathan, meanwhile, found himself working harder than he ever had in his life. He picked up extra delivery shifts, took on weekend work, scrimped, and saved to make sure Lyra had everything she needed. It was exhausting, but it was also strangely fulfilling. For the first time since he left Earth, Nathan felt like his life had purpose beyond simple survival. Lyra, for her part, threw herself into her new life with infectious enthusiasm. She made friends at school, joined clubs, participated in activities. Watching her bloom was like watching a flower that had been kept in darkness finally reach the sunlight. The frightened, desperate girl from the alley was still part of who she was, but now there was so much more. Confidence, joy, curiosity, hope. One evening, about 8 months into their arrangement, Nathan came home from work to find Lyra at the apartment's small table, surrounded by papers and diagrams. She looked up when he entered, her expression excited. Nathan, I have to show you something. We learned about propulsion systems in school today, and I realized there is a flaw in the standard Alcubierre drive configuration that most ships use. Look, If you adjust the field geometry here and optimize the power distribution here, you could increase efficiency by at least 12%. Nathan looked at the complex equations covering the pages, understanding maybe 5% of what he was seeing. That's great, Lyra. But I have no idea what any of this means. Lyra laughed. Sorry, I get excited. But Nathan, this could be important. If I am right, this could save shipping companies millions of credits in fuel costs. I want to submit it to the Mars Engineering Journal, see if they will publish it. You should, Nathan said, dropping onto his bed with a groan of exhaustion. If anyone can revolutionize space travel, it's you. Lyra's enthusiasm dimmed a bit as she noticed his exhaustion. You are working too hard. You come home tired every day. This is not sustainable. I'm fine, Nathan lied. Just a long shift. You are not fine. You are sacrificing your health, your happiness, for me. I wish I could contribute more. I wish I could help with expenses. You're a kid, Nathan said. Your job is to go to school and learn things. My job is to make sure you can do that. I will not be a kid forever, Lyra said quietly. Someday, I will repay everything you have given me. I promise. Nathan wanted to tell her that repayment was not necessary, that he had not done this to create a debt. But he could see the determination in her eyes, the fierce pride that demanded she be allowed to contribute somehow. So he just nodded and changed the subject, asking about her day at school. The one-year anniversary of their sponsorship agreement arrived faster than Nathan expected. He and Lyra went back to the administrative complex for the review that would determine whether her temporary status would become permanent. Nathan was nervous, worried that some bureaucratic complication would emerge to snatch away everything they had built. But Kelvin, the same Zentari official who had initially approved their application, greeted them with what Nathan now recognized as his version of a smile. Your review is merely a formality, Kelvin said. Lyra's integration has been exemplary. Her school reports are outstanding. And you, Nathan Brooks, have maintained steady employment and provided adequate support. I see no reason not to approve permanent residency. The relief Nathan felt was almost overwhelming. Lyra, standing beside him, gripped his hand so tightly he thought his bones might break. There is one additional item, Kelvin said, tapping his datapad. Lyra's recent publication in the Mars Engineering Journal has attracted some attention. The Prometheus Institute has offered her a full scholarship for advanced studies in aerospace engineering. The scholarship includes a stipend that should ease your financial burden considerably, Nathan Brooks. Nathan turned to Lyra in shock. You got published? And you got a scholarship? When were you going to tell me this? Lyra's cheeks flushed darker purple. I wanted to be sure it was real before I said anything. I did not want to disappoint you if it fell through. Disappoint me? Lyra, this is incredible. Kelvin's mandibles clicked in what Nathan had learned to recognize as amusement. Indeed. It seems your investment in compassion has yielded remarkable returns, Nathan Brooks. Lyra's work on propulsion efficiency has already attracted interest from several major shipping corporations. She has a bright future ahead of her. As they left the administrative building for the second time, now with Lyra's permanent residency confirmed, Nathan felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had not saved the world or cured a disease or done anything that would make the history books. But he had saved one person, given one girl a chance at life, and that felt like enough. More than enough. 5 years passed with the kind of speed that only happens when life is full and meaningful. Lyra graduated from the Prometheus Institute with top honors, her thesis on advanced propulsion systems earning her recognition across the colony and beyond. She was recruited by Stellar Dynamics, one of the galaxy's premier aerospace engineering firms, with a salary that made Nathan's delivery wages look like pocket change. On the day Lyra signed her employment contract, effectively ending their sponsorship agreement now that she was financially independent, she insisted on taking Nathan to the fanciest restaurant in New Europa, a place so upscale that Nathan felt uncomfortable just walking through the door. Over a meal that probably cost more than Nathan's monthly rent, Lyra became uncharacteristically serious. I have been thinking about everything you did for me, she said. About how you found me eating paper in an alley and decided to change my entire life trajectory. Do you remember what I said that first day? About humans being only interested in profit? Yeah, Nathan said. You were repeating what the traders told you. I was wrong. So wrong. Humans are capable of extraordinary compassion. You saw suffering and chose to act, not because it benefited you, but because it was right. You gave me everything: safety, food, education, a future. You asked for nothing in return. That's not entirely true, Nathan said. I got a lot out of it too. You made my life better just by being in it. Lyra smiled. Still, I want to do something to acknowledge what you did. I have been working with some colleagues on a foundation. We call it the Paper to Stars Project. It will identify and sponsor undocumented refugees throughout the Mars colony, providing them with food, shelter, legal assistance, and educational opportunities. Everything you provided for me, we will provide for others. Nathan felt his throat tighten. Lyra, that's amazing. And I want you to run it, Lyra continued. Full-time position, competitive salary, real benefits. You would be perfect for it. You understand what these people are going through because you have lived it, helped someone through it. What do you say? Nathan thought about his delivery job, the endless routes through the colony's commercial districts, the monotony that had defined his life for so long. Then he thought about the look on Lyra's face that first day in the alley, the desperate gratitude of someone who had been seen when the world tried to make her invisible. I say yes, Nathan said. Absolutely yes. The Paper to Stars project launched 3 months later in a modest office in the lower commercial district, not far from the alley where Nathan had first found Lyra. The location was deliberate, a reminder of where they had started. In its first year, the foundation helped 32 refugees gain legal status and access to education. In its second year, that number tripled. By its 5th year, the project had expanded to other colonies throughout the Mars system, a model for refugee assistance that other organizations tried to replicate. Nathan found his calling in the work, using everything he had learned from helping Lyra to help others. Every refugee he assisted, every life he changed, felt like an extension of that first act of kindness in the alley. And every time he felt tired or overwhelmed, he would remember Lyra's words from that first day. You saw me when I was invisible. 10 years after their first meeting, Lyra's propulsion innovations had revolutionized interstellar travel, cutting journey times by 30% across the galaxy. She had become famous, a Vereen name known in every colony and on every world. Awards and honors followed her wherever she went. But she never forgot where she came from or who had given her the chance to become who she was. At a ceremony honoring the Paper to Stars project's 10th anniversary, Lyra gave a speech that brought tears to Nathan's eyes. She spoke about her journey from the alley to the stars, about the human who had seen her worth when she was at her lowest, about the power of simple kindness to change everything. Humans have a saying, Lyra said to the assembled crowd of dignitaries and refugees and supporters. Give someone a fish, and you feed them for a day. Teach them to fish, and you feed them for a lifetime. But Nathan Brooks did something even more profound. He did not just give me fish or teach me to fish. He gave me back my belief that I deserved to eat it all. He gave me back my humanity, if you will forgive the irony of that term. He saw me, truly saw me, and decided I was worth saving. That is the lesson of the Paper to Stars project. Every being, regardless of species or status or documentation, has inherent worth. Every being deserves to be seen. The crowd erupted in applause. Nathan, sitting in the front row, wiped at his eyes and tried to look dignified. Lyra caught his gaze and smiled, that same brilliant smile he had first seen when she realized she would never have to eat paper again. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled and celebrated, Nathan found a quiet moment alone on the balcony overlooking the city. New Europa glittered below him, a testament to what different species could accomplish when they worked together. Somewhere in those gleaming towers and bustling streets were dozens of refugees whose lives had been changed by the Foundation, beings who had been invisible until someone chose to see them. Lyra joined him on the balcony, 2 glasses of Zentari wine in her hands. She handed one to Nathan and leaned against the railing beside him. Do you ever think about that day in the alley? She asked. About how different everything could have been if you had just driven past. All the time, Nathan admitted. I think about how close I came to ignoring that rustling sound, to just reorganizing my cargo and leaving. It would have been easier, safer, and you would have still been there, eating cardboard, slowly starving. But you did not drive past. You stopped. You looked. You cared. That is what makes you extraordinary, Nathan. Not your species, not your abilities, just your willingness to see suffering and do something about it. Nathan sipped his wine, considering her words. You know what's funny? Before I met you, I thought I had come to Mars to disappear, to be nobody. But you made me realize that being nobody is a choice, and it is not one I want to make anymore. You gave me purpose as much as I gave you opportunity. Lyra nodded. We saved each other, then. That seems fitting. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights dance against the dome's transparent ceiling. Above the dome, the stars wheeled across the Martian sky, cold and distant and beautiful. Nathan thought about all the worlds out there, all the beings living their lives, some of them probably as desperate and invisible as Lyra had once been. We should expand again, Nathan said suddenly. Not just Mars colony, but other systems. There are refugees everywhere, beings who need help. I was thinking the same thing, Lyra said. I have been in contact with some colleagues on Proxima Station. They want to start a chapter there. And I heard from a Zentari diplomat who thinks we could get support for a foundation on the homeworld. The galaxy is a big place, Nathan said. Then we have a lot of work to do, Lyra replied. Good thing we have time. Nathan raised his glass. To time. And to paper-eating aliens who become aerospace engineers. Lyra laughed and clinked her glass against his. To delivery boys who become heroes, even though they will never admit it. They drank, and the stars watched, and somewhere in the city below, a being who had been invisible began to be seen, because someone chose to stop and look and care. It was a small thing, really, one person helping another. But small things, Nathan had learned, had a way of becoming magnificent when you gave them the chance to grow. 15 years after Nathan found Lyra in the alley, the Paper to Stars project operated in 43 colony systems and had helped over 10,000 refugees gain legal status and build new lives. Lyra's propulsion innovations had become standard across the galaxy, her name synonymous with advancement and compassion. And Nathan Brooks, once a nobody delivery driver trying to disappear, had become one of the most respected humanitarian workers in known space. But the thing Nathan was most proud of was not the awards, or the recognition, or even the lives they had changed. It was the message they had sent to the galaxy, a message that resonated across species and cultures and worlds. The message was simple: everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to eat real food instead of paper. Everyone deserves a chance to reach for the stars. And sometimes, all it takes to change the galaxy is one person deciding to care about one other person. Everything else grows from there, like seeds planted in good soil, reaching up toward the light. Nathan thought about this often in the years that followed, as the foundation grew and evolved, as more refugees found hope and more helpers found purpose. He thought about it when new chapters opened, when success stories came in, when he saw the fear in a refugee's eyes transform into hope. He thought about it most of all when he visited Mars and found himself driving past that alley behind the Zentari textile warehouse. The bins were still there, though the graffiti had changed. The ground was still covered in gravel, but the shadows held no desperate, starving girl eating cardboard to survive. Those shadows were empty now, and that emptiness was beautiful. Nathan would stand there sometimes, remembering, and he would think, this is where it started. This is where one human delivery boy decided to leave real food for an alien girl who needed help. This is where everything changed, and the galaxy was better for it. The end came not with fanfare, but with quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you have lived a life that mattered. Nathan Brooks was 73 years old when he finally retired from the Paper to Stars project, handing over leadership to a capable team that had learned from his example. Lyra, by then a matriarch of her species and one of the most influential engineers in galactic history, attended his retirement ceremony. You know, Lyra said during her speech, her violet eyes still bright despite the years. Humans have this curious trait that other species often misunderstand. They call it stubbornness, but I have learned it is something more profound. It is the refusal to accept that things have to be the way they are. Nathan Brooks saw me eating paper and said, no, this is not acceptable. This will not stand. And then he did something about it. That is humanity at its best. That is humanity saying, we can be better, we will be better, and we will pull you up with us as we climb. The audience, a mix of species from across the galaxy, erupted in applause. Nathan, sitting in a chair that had been specially adjusted for his aging human frame, felt tears on his cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. Later, in a quiet moment after the ceremony, Lyra took Nathan's hands in hers. Her lavender skin had deepened with age, fine lines now visible around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life well lived. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for seeing me, for saving me, for showing me that the galaxy is full of people who care, even when it feels like darkness everywhere." "Thank you," Nathan replied, "for letting me help, for giving my life meaning when I thought I had none, for proving that one small act of kindness can echo across the stars." They embraced, human and Vereen, two beings who had found each other in the shadows and built something bright together. Around them, the foundation they had created continued its work, seeing the invisible, feeding the hungry, helping the helpless. And somewhere, on some distant world, in some forgotten alley, another person made the choice to stop and look and care. Because that is what people do when they remember their own humanity. That is what people do when they decide that everyone deserves real food instead of paper, everyone deserves to be seen, and everyone deserves a chance to reach for the stars. The story of Nathan Brooks and Lyra became legend, told and retold across the galaxy, adapted into films and books and songs. But the truth of it was simpler and more profound than any legend could capture. It was the story of one person helping another person, and that help rippling outward in waves that touched thousands, then millions, then entire civilizations. It was the story of paper and stars, of hunger and hope, of darkness and the people who bring light. It was the story of humanity at its best, proving that, yeah, we can be extraordinary when we choose compassion over convenience, connection over isolation, love over indifference. And that story, like all the best stories, never really ends. It just keeps growing, keeps spreading, keeps inspiring new people to stop when they hear rustling in the alley, to look when others would walk past, to care when caring would be easier to avoid. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves real food. And everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves their chance to reach for the stars. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.